A few more cards have been revealed in the Old Gods, including my own, and I'm going to re-review my own card because I feel like based off of the feedback given, I can do a better job of reviewing the card that I came up with. Deathwing, Dragonlord. As usual, I'm going to start with the pros first and then the cons. So the pros. This card is a 10-mana 12/12 with an upside. Typically in the late game, it seems like the stats are balanced around mana equals attack and health for bad cards. And now we've got a 10-mana 12/12 with an upside, which is put all dragons from your hand into the battlefield. A lot of dragons have battle cries in them. Kind of the same problem that Varian Rin has when you put it in Control Warrior with all those dragons, like Alexstrasza. You don't necessarily want to bring out the dragons without the dragon battle cry. Some of the dragons do well though, such as Ysera. I personally think this card is too slow. If you're running dragons, your high end tends to already be there, and you don't really need another high end card. That said, this is the ultimate greed late game. If you play this in a control versus control matchup, it's really good. It's like Sneeds on steroids. You get a 10-mana 12/12, which they have to deal with. The Death Rattle is something like put a 4/12 into play, tamely, and it might be Ysera. So it's like 10 mana for, if you add the stats together, which isn't how you should do Death Rattle, but if you add the stats together, that's like a 10 mana 16/24. Possibilities of this card are large, just because the sheer amount of stat value they can get with this card, it's really big, but it's really hard to survive until turn 10 and have dragons in your hand. Another way you can cheat the card out is with Dragon Consort, make the card cost 8 mana. So, it's a big card. We'll see whether or not decks or the format are that slow. I can imagine in a ridiculously slow format, not saying that that's going to happen, just saying that that's what would be required for this card to see play. In a very slow format, Deathwing Dragonlord is kind of the king. He's the king of slowness right here. In Arena, this card is probably too slow as well. To spend your turn 10 doing nothing other than play one slow card might be too slow. Embrace the Shadow. Priests get a cute little spell here. Not necessarily to replace Akanai Soul Priest, but to have a 2-mana Akanai Soul Priest which has its effect. Some people look at this card and their immediate reaction is, why do I play Embrace the Shadow when I have Akanai Soul Priest, which is this card, plus 2 mana, and you get a 3/5. I can already do Akanai Soul Priest and then Circle of Healing, and I usually don't need to do it on turn 2. If you're doing Akanai Soul Priest and then Circle of Healing, you're kind of paying an extra 2 mana for a 3/1. Granted, it's a 3/1 with serious amounts of threat, but, you know, when you think about a 2 mana extra 3/1, it's not that good. So perhaps Embrace the Shadow has some potential. And it's not just that, too. Embrace the Shadow makes a 1-turn kill with healing spells much more easy, because paying 4 mana for the Enabler is a lot, but paying just 2 mana, that's not too bad. Imagine throughout the course of the game, you've played Justicar Trueheart, and then you play Embrace the Shadow, Prophet Valen, Flash Heal, Hero Power. That amount of healing is 14, and then doubled is 28. Bam! There you have it. Akanai Soul Priest normally wouldn't allow that because it would be too much mana, but Embrace the Shadow, that's a 2 mana savings. I'm quite a bit more optimistic about this card than many people have been. The reason why this card isn't thought of as that good is because Akanai Soul Priest kind of overshadows it. Real, it does. Akanai Soul Priest you can play on turn 4 as a 3/5, so it has that added flexibility. But the thing is, the Akanai Soul Priest usually gets played with Circle of Healing, at which point you get a 3/1, which you don't normally expect to live the next turn anyways. Why not save 2 mana and Embrace the Shadow? And the main reason is because with Akanai Soul Priest, you can play Akanai, you can ping something with your hero power. You can just play Akanai Soul Priest on turn 4, it's flexible, whereas Embrace the Shadow is very specific of a combo piece. Will that deck see play? Hard to say right now. It doesn't look like it. But I will mention that Prophet Valen decks and Flash Heal, those decks have been around, so watch the shadows. In Arena, this card is so bad. It's not as bad as I thought. I was going to say, like, it almost does nothing, but it's like a 1-turn shadow form. That's pretty bad. But You can combo it with Earthen Ring Farseer. It's pretty bad though in Arena. Don't pick it. It's less useless than I thought it was though. Servant of Yogg-Saron. If you watched me earlier, I did review this card in a lot of detail. However, I'm going to explain in even more detail now. In case you didn't get enough detail the first time. Because I got a lot of feedback on the way that I had mathed out Servant of Yogg-Saron, which I thought was very helpful. Next up, a card which is also random, which is far better. On quick examination of this spreadsheet, it appears that the person who made this specific listing of stats is that something that's about 4 stats is considered poor, like a 2/2 for example. Something that's 5 or 6 stats is considered average. For example, SI7 agent. Good is somewhere along the lines of 7 to 8 stats, and then great is somewhere in the realm of 9+ stats, and or good effects. So, looks like the average is roughly 7 stats? We're gonna call it like a 3/4. Of course, there's all sorts of other things at work involving abilities and whatnot. But let's suppose, for the sake of argument, that a random 3-cost minion is just a 3/3 vanilla. That's still really good, because you're paying 6 mana for an 8/8, split into a 5/5 and a 3/3. Basically, bigger Silverhand Knight. In a world where Boulder Fist Ogre is almost playable, and is a top pick in Arena, this Mage Arena card is going to be absolutely ridiculous on a 6 mana 8/8, or if you want to be more generous with the average, a 6 mana 8/9. Plus, you have to consider that in some cases you just win the game if you get injured Blademaster or King Mukla or Imp Gang Boss. This card, of course, is insane in Mage. Okay, I guess I'll pick Mage in Arena. Haven't played Arena Mage in a while. Guess I'll pick that. Mage isn't that good, but I guess I'll pick it. Yeah, Faceless Summoner. I think they made a pretty big mistake making this card common. This card is good enough in stats to even make it in Constructed, I'd say. Forlorn Stalker, give all your Death Rattle minions in your hand +1/+1. Hunter non-facey card. Hard to imagine this card being good at the moment, given the few good Death Rattle cards that are out. There's a Death Rattle God, N'Zoth the Corruptor, and we'll see what Death Rattle minions come out there. Seems like it might be too slow even then. Compare this with Mistcaller, which is a 6 mana 4/4 for Shaman, which saw absolutely no play and gave all your minions in your entire deck and hand +1/+1. And we can kind of start to see a story of how this card isn't really there. At the moment, it seems like both N'Zoth and Forlorn Stalker are going to have to hold off judgment on those until we see the other Death Rattle cards. But I will say this, even with non-standard play in Wild, I currently can't really think of a Hunter deck that makes that much use of Death Rattle. Even in Wild, back in the days of Undertaker, with the OP Undertaker, you used to play Undertaker, you played your Leper Gnomes, you played your Hunter Creepers, you played your Mad Scientists, you played your Web Spinners, and that was really good. But the problem with Forlorn Stalker is it's kind of slow, plus it only gives Death Rattle minions in your hand +1/+1 when you would usually rather play them out before the Forlorn Stalker already. I don't think this card will even make Wild, which means in Standard basically has no chance. And in Arena it's a 3 mana 4/2. Don't pick this card. Shadowcaster, a really impressive rogue card, which has a huge effect when it comes into play. It's just like the Priest Legendary card, Herald Valash, except it does you even one step better, because Herald Valash does not allow you to copy your Battlecry effects. Shadowcaster, however, does. So, suppose you copy your SI7 agent. You're going to get a 1/1 copy of the SI7 agent that costs 1. That's really nice. There's some combos you can run here. For example, you go Brand Bronzebeard in the Shadowcaster, and then you copy your Brand Bronzebeard twice. Now you have 2 Brand Bronzebeards in your hand. And then in a future turn, you Brand Bronzebeard, and then you Shadowcaster your Shadowcaster, and then you have 1 copy of Brand Bronzebeard, and then 2 copies of Shadowcaster in your hand. And then you play Brand Bronzebeard, Shadowcaster, Shadowcaster? somehow, and then you copy Brand Bronzebeard and Shadowcaster. Wow. But more realistically, you're going to want to use this with some really good Battlecry effects. On top of just good old Shadowcaster Brand Bronzebeard's shenanigans, though, cards which have an immediate effect when they enter play, I mean Battlecries, but also cards that you want to play and then play other things with, such as Malygos are fantastic with it. Gadget Zone Auctioneer, you have a 1 mana way to basically draw a card every single turn you play a spell in the future. You can get more discounts with Emperor Thorson. You can also hit your Death Rattles with it, which are also good because 1/1s with Death Rattles are really easy to activate. Insert your Undercity Huckster here, your Cairns, your Sylvanas, some exciting combos, and a lot of value can be gained through Shadowcaster. If the meta ever got that slow, hitting a Nubarak with it would be pretty good. Get your 1/1 Anubarak. When Anubarak dies, then you get Anubarak back in your hand and you get a 4/4. But that begs the question of, how did your original Anubarak not die, and how are you not already winning it already? So we have to make sure to be a bit more realistic when we talk about the possibilities that Shadowcaster can do. Shifting Shade! Hey, it's a 4 mana 4/3 with Death Rattle. Does that remind you of a good card? So the Death Rattle effect is kind of like draw a card. You're copying a card from your opponent's deck, and your opponent's deck is presumably good, so that'll usually be a good card. So it's almost like 4 mana 4/3 draw a card, which is a pretty good card. It's better than Polluted Hoarder, and it turns out that adding 1 stat to a okay card makes it a good card. Some slight potential on copying a card might be better, because you don't draw a card. Priests are one of the classes that can take the game deep into Fatigue. Of course, sometimes your opponent's deck has some cards in it which are absolutely useless for you, which you felt before if you played Priest back in the day and you ran Thoughtsteal. At this point in the meta, the cards have gotten good enough that Priests have found running Thoughtsteal to be too slow. But Thoughtsteal did see a lot of play back in the day, and that was a 3 mana copy 2 cards from your opponent's deck. So at the cost of copying 1 fewer card, you get a 4/3. And since Thoughtsteal is 3 mana, that implies that copying a card from your opponent's deck is 1.5 mana, which means you get basically a 2.5 mana 4/3. That's a good deal. It doesn't quite work that way, but the point is, stat-wise, this card is competitive. If you simply think about the thought of a 4 mana 4/3 Death Rattle draw card, that card's pretty good. Shifting Shade is a mite bit less good than that card, but it still should be good. In Arena, this card's going to be amazing, because it is basically 4 mana 4/3 draw a card Death Rattle. Finally, we've got Demented Frostcaller. Does this card remind you of Flamewaker? Flamewaker's 3 mana 2/4. After you cast a spell, deal 2 random damage to characters. Demented Frostcaller is 1 mana more expensive because Blizzard values freeze at a higher amount than dealing 2 damage randomly, apparently. Now, the main problem with Demented Frostcaller is the enemy hero is a character, and freezing a lot of the heroes in the game does absolutely nothing. Perhaps Demented Frostcaller's one saving grace is that you will not target frozen or ready enemy characters with this card when you cast a spell. If there's only 1 enemy minion out there, if you cast 2 spells, you're guaranteed to freeze the enemy minion, and then you can continue to keep it frozen. The card says, after you cast a spell, freeze a random enemy character, which means that if you fireball the next play that the opponent makes, then again the Demented Frostcaller will freeze the other minion that was frozen the last turn, so you can lock out minions. However, you are going to have to cast 2 spells a turn in order to guarantee yourself of freezing the enemy minion, because again, you can refreeze the enemy hero. That's the main weakness of the card, the fact that it's basically a 50-50 each time on whether or not you pointlessly freeze the opponent's face or you actually do something useful like freezing the enemy character. The fact that it costs 4 is very prohibitive. You can kind of imagine if Flamewaker cost 4, it would probably also be pointless, even though it's very good at 3. That's a lot of words to say that I think this card is terrible. either cost too much mana or too low stats, which is the same thing you could say for pretty much every card. The actual card text effect, it varies from useless to sometimes useful to extremely useful. And certainly I understand the concept that having your minions frozen forever is not very fun. But this is far too high a variance card to rely on. In Arena, this card is also going to be worthless because it's a 4 mana 2/4. And you're going to be able to cast the occasional spell in Arena, but it's going to be far less good than Frost Elemental, which is the card that you would compare it to, the 6 mana 5/5, which immediately freezes a random enemy character. No, it immediately freezes a character the time it enters play. It turns out that that tempo difference is pretty important, and when you can do it repeatedly, it's nice. But when it's a 50-50 between face and the minion you actually want to target, Something that would be even more interesting, I think, for this card, is if it just said, after you cast a spell, freeze a random enemy minion. Certainly that means that sometimes you would no longer be able to freeze the warrior who is about to hit you in the face with a weapon, and then you wouldn't be able to save yourself. But I think a lot of these random cards would do a lot better if it only hit minions, because oftentimes you're just really hoping, oh, come on, let me hit a minion. Let me hit a minion. No, face! And then Twitch chat cheers. It's like, yes, smart card. But in actuality, the card did something really dumb. Anyways, TLDR, card's bad.
Now I've got a tale to tell you of the ones from long ago. There's an evil that's been dreaming, but now it's softly screaming. From the darkness, their power will grow. Their voices are made of poison. When you listen, you are sure to be disturbed. You can lock your doors. You can say your prayers. No creature can resist their wicked words. Never mind, no need to worry. That's all just a story of the whispers of the old gods.